Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to a special online video event today called Reclaiming Your Body's Innate Guidance System: How to Listen to Your Bones and 5 More Wisdom Areas to Heal Trauma and Increase Intuition. My name is Stephen Dine. I'm the founder and CEO of the Shift Network, and I'm really delighted to be here with you and learning right alongside you from a remarkable woman. Her name is Suzanne Scurlock-Durana, which is a great combination of Irish and Cuban name there. And she's really helping to pioneer a new understanding of how do we relate to our bodies in a way that surfaces more wisdom and allows us to live fuller lives as a result. So it's a different kind of relationship with our body that we're going to be exploring today. I want to say a little bit about her up front and also let you know that this isn't going to be the end of the journey. We actually have a full 7-week program that's building upon the principles that you're going to hear about today, and that's coming up in just a few weeks. It's called Reclaiming Your 6 Body Wisdom Areas. We'll share more about that towards the end. So I'll share a little bit more about Suzanne. So she's got a background as really teaching conscious awareness. So and she's doing this from the Healing from the Core training curriculum and doing international workshops and webinars and speaking engagements. And she was one of the people who was personally mentored by Dr. John Upledger and continues to teach craniosacral therapy and somato-emotional release for the Upledger Institute, and also collaborate with Emily Conrad, who is founder of Continuum Movement. So she's got a diverse background in different body-centered ways of opening to different kind of intelligence and healing and transformation. So we're really pleased and honored to have you here today. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a delight to be here.
Well, I always like to start our journeys with a little bit of personal backstory because it gives a sense for why you're so passionate for what you do. So this journey into the body's wisdom, maybe share a little bit about your own journey into body wisdom and what it opened up for you.
Yeah, I have to say, I think I started my journey a little earlier than most people. I had a very, very traumatic event happen when I was 17. I was actually strangled by a very dear friend who was coming off of a long stint on amphetamines. And it was a situation that was very, at the time, I really didn't understand what was happening. And I almost died in the process. But yeah, it was not a pretty picture. But the interesting piece, I mean, it was a huge sense of betrayal for me. It was a huge sense of, what did I do wrong? What's wrong with me? There must have been something wrong with me for him to have done this. All of those things that go on when you have a trauma like that happen. But the thing that was most interesting for me in the aftermath of it was I recognized that for about 20 to 30 minutes before he actually wrapped his hands around my throat and clamped down, I felt an uneasiness in his presence. And I could not, it just made no logical sense to me. He was like an older brother to me. He was a dear friend. We were having a conversation about some things in his life that weren't going so well, but it was a very friendly conversation. This was a man that I trusted just implicitly, and yet my gut was telling me, something's off here, Suzanne, something's off here. Get out of the car, get out of the car. We were actually sitting in a parking lot at a pool party, and I didn't move. He was my friend. I trusted him. I thought that he would feel like I was impolite or I was unfriendly or I wasn't a good friend if I got up and left. So my mind discounted what my gut was telling me. And interestingly enough, it was a very fascinating thing for me to realize in the aftermath that I actually had known long before anything happened that something was coming. And that fascinated me. So of course, it took a whole decade of doing different kinds of work in my 20s to heal from that trauma. But the one thing I promised myself when I figured it out was that I would always listen to my gut after that. I was completely fascinated by that. So interestingly enough, I talk about this in my first book, Full Body Presence. I was at a party when I was in college, a couple of years later, and I was out on a date with a basketball player, very popular basketball player. And I got that same uneasy feeling in my gut. And I trusted it this time. And I got up and left the party, left him, made the excuse of going to the bathroom, didn't go back. And I heard very shortly thereafter that he was getting a reputation on campus as date raping women.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, I got it that time. I'm here, gut. I'm listening to you. I'm on it. I'm never going to let this go by. So interestingly enough, I feel like my journey with this started way, way, way back for me in looking at what the different parts of my body have to show me. And we do know, by the way, that the gut, the fact the whole torso has this incredible capacity to give us information about what's going on around us in our environment that is pretty uncanny. HeartMath is doing some of the research on that, and it's really interesting. And also, it tells us in any given moment whether something's right or whether something's really off. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's where it began. And then I went on to have a number of other experiences. I ended up learning and then teaching craniosacral therapy. Been doing that for a little over 3 decades. And one of the things about craniosacral therapy is that one of our basic tenets is that there's a cellular wisdom in the body, that every cell of the body knows what you need in any given moment. And craniosacral therapy is a hands-on, very light touch for helping people tune into that. And we help translate what the body is saying and how that healing can unfold. We help remove restrictions and things like that that get in the way of that natural healing. So it folded right into my other creative bent, which was, what about these different areas of the body? You know, what about them? So that's really where I began with this, and it continues to this day. And I think probably until the day I take my last breath, I'll be exploring this stuff.
Well, those are pretty dramatic ways to get your lessons early on, and not all of us have such dramatic lessons. But I think the principle that you're talking about is so important. And it's interesting that somehow in our culture, like, intuition is a little bit still marginal. But when you talk about, I had a gut, trust your gut. Like, even like very tough politicians will say, trust your gut. And really they're speaking into this, that there is a body wisdom that has some extra information for us about situations, whether it's avoiding a danger or perhaps going in the right direction. And but then we tend to be a little bit narrow bandwidth. So it's like, it might be okay to trust your gut, but then, well, I don't know about trusting my heart, or much less my feet, you know. So like, let's talk about how that sense of like opening to the information pulse from one area, how we can expand that to include more areas, and what are some of the areas, and what are their special gifts?
Well, here's the interesting piece about this. As I began to play with, the gut was the first one I really got a clean hit on and began to trust. But then I would notice that sometimes my gut would give me good information, and sometimes it was a little off. And I started to play with, well, why? Why would that be? And I began to understand that the heart had wisdom as well. And when we think of the heart, it's like the deep inspiration of the heart. When in Chinese medicine, when they talk about the heart, they talk about inspiration, about being on fire. It's a fire element in Chinese medicine. So that whole idea of the heart being about our deepest inspiration, as well as compassion and love and all of those deep pieces that we already understand, most of us, and know about. That was a kind of a key piece for me to add to this gut knowing, because my gut could tell my heart whether this inspiration I suddenly had was actually a good idea, or whether it was just a wonderful idea in this moment, but it wasn't really something that was right for me or something that I should follow up on. So that I put those two together fairly early on and began to play with them. Mm-hmm. Then I began to work with the pelvis, because I had seen that the pelvis, with all the power that comes out of our pelvis, was a very key piece with whether we had enough energy to follow through on the inspirations of our heart if the gut told us that it was actually the right thing to do. And there are many, many times, and here's where craniosacral therapy comes in, there are many different injuries and traumas that the pelvis sustains across the course of our lives that can muffle or compartmentalize the wisdom and the power that comes out of the pelvis. So you're limping along in a way when the pelvis isn't on board, the engine of the body, with all those other areas. It's also interesting that the feet and the legs are a part. I call them our stealth wisdom area, because most people don't think of our feet and legs as being a wisdom area, right? Like, feet and legs, we exercise, that's it. But the truth is that when you activate your feet and legs, there's a whole level of metabolizing, if you will, that happens in terms of what's going on in terms of our lives. So think about this. I mean, in a way, it's almost a no-brainer that when you have something you're really mulling over, got lots of options, can't figure out what to do, there's no really clear, oh, that's the right way to go, and you put on your shoes and you go take a walk, even if you don't even think about it, you often come home with the answer. It's just floated to the surface. And it's because, in my opinion, it's because when you start to walk and you get that cross-body movement, the right and left halves of the brain integrate at a better level. And when they integrate at a better level, you get a better decision. And we see this, I actually talk about it in my book, Reclaiming Your Body. Greg Braden talks about when he was trying to make a decision, and he actually attributed the decision to his heart. But if you read the account in my book, it was actually his feet and legs that got him to the answer that he needed to hear. Yeah.
Well, that's truly fascinating. I think that you're pointing to some really fascinating things. So it's almost like the different parts of our body almost become like a wisdom council, if you will. They all have different viewpoints that when you, and if we can synthesize that in our conscious mind, then we've got access to a much greater range of perspectives, sort of like having a cabinet or something of our own.
Yeah, or a medicine circle. If you're of Native American bent, you think of having a medicine circle, and you want to hear from each one of these. The area we haven't talked about yet are the bones and that prefrontal cortex, the central area of the brain there, where a lot of this information is synthesized and created. But all of these centers, I think of them as having characteristic kind of wisdom. You know, it's not to say you can't have overlap, but each one of them is like a neighborhood. It has its own characteristic. You know, is it Italian, or is it Greek, or is it Iranian, or Persian? Each area has its own strengths and its own blind spots based on the wisdom area itself. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about you mentioned a little bit about how trauma can prevent certain areas from coming online, and maybe talk about which, we might have our favorites, or we tend to play, focus just on one, or why we might only have one or two of these open and not the others.
Well, it's interesting, Stephen. I think you have to look at the culture. Each person has to look at their education. You have to look at what your psychological makeup is. And then you have to look at your trauma history. And all four of those are things that will affect how you connect and how you work with these different wisdom areas. And each one of those, if you have trauma, like trauma is the final finger here in my hand, is that trauma will block many of these things in a much deeper, bigger way. But equally important can be something cultural or religious, for instance. I'll give you kind of a funny one. I was raised, my father was a Southern Baptist minister, and I was raised on the front pew. Now, Baptists have incredible hearts, and they have great singing voices, and they're lovely people, but they don't live much below their chest because it's not considered in that religious culture something that's okay. In fact, the rest of the body is really considered dicey. It's going to be a trap. It's going to be something that'll take you down. It's not something you actually want to embody in, much less live there on a regular basis, because it'll seduce you into evil or whatever. And there are jokes about this culturally, but there's a religious belief that says, don't live in the lower half of your body. And in fact, children growing up in that culture with no trauma at all still have no modeling for being in the lower halves of their body. They see all of these adults walking around completely ignoring the bottom half of their system. Yes, they can walk and they do bodily functions, but they're not really embodied there. They're certainly not, they're not actually receiving the wisdom from that particular area of their body, particularly the pelvis. So you look at the number of evangelical ministers and politicians who have been taken down by their shadow sides coming out because they were not even aware at some level of what was going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you can see why, if you're closing off to an area that has wisdom, then that might leak out in some more self-destructive ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's a cultural or a religious way. But then let's talk now. You asked me about trauma. Because I'm a craniosacral therapist and have been so for 35 years, this is the area that I see the most. Because people come into me because of trauma. They come in because they've taken a fall on their coccyx. They come in because they've taken a blow to their chest in a car accident. They come in because they've taken a fall and hit their face on the flower pot on their child's front stoop in the winter in the ice. They come in for lots and lots of different problems. And so I see trauma all the time. And depending on what the trauma is and how serious it is, and how long-standing it is, it can be a major player in locking people out of the wisdom of their bodies. Because the body, when you have a trauma that's overwhelming at the time of the trauma, the body literally encapsulates it, closes it off, and saves the rest of the body from being overwhelmed. And then you're operating without that little encapsulated area, which thinks it's doing a great job for you, when in fact, eventually it's going to start to be a real problem. So trauma has its own little modus operandi, if you will, in the ways in which it locks us out of our wisdom.
Well, let's go. I mean, there's so many areas we could go into, but let's go into the specific areas, what we can learn from each different body center, maybe. So let's starting with the heart. Like, what do you really feel like are the gifts of the heart? And you have this intriguing concept of working with the back of the heart too. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So the heart, as I said, in Chinese medicine, it has to do with your fire, has to do with your ability to reach out and connect with people. Like this is, the heart meridians all run from your heart down into your hands and fingers. When you think about wanting to reach someone, to connect with them, what do? We hug them. We reach out and touch them. That's the heart. That's the center in which we're inspired by life. We connect with other people. Our compassion comes out of here. Most people, and I imagine most of your listeners, are people who have a tremendous amount of compassion, who feel heartful in how they live their lives, that they are very connected. And this is a wonderful thing, unless you're missing the back of your heart, because the ways in which we love our world, the ways in which we radiate and love our world is coming from the front of the heart. The ways in which we love ourselves so that we can replenish ourselves is coming from the back of the heart, where the deep well of the heart exists. And it's a really key concept. And I have seen this in all of my thousands of students, that particularly those who are caregivers. So we're talking all healthcare practitioners, people who care for the elderly, people who care for children, particularly special needs children. They have the vulnerability of possibly burning out because they love in an open-ended way from the front of their heart without paying any attention to the back of their heart, to their own deep well, where they can take care of themselves and keep their heart primed and filled up.
That's fascinating. So would you recommend that you just simply bring your awareness to the back of your heart, or is there something a little more specific that you do to gain that access to the back versus the front?
So there are a couple things when you're working with this. Number one, you're working with, do you have a limiting belief about loving yourself? See, that's it. And then we'll talk more about that in the module about the heart. But that's that whole belief system, or your expectations about the heart. That's one key trait with that. Number two is, yes, it does have to do with being able to feel the back of your heart. So when I'm working with someone in a craniosacral session, for instance, and there's actually a story about it in Reclaiming Your Body. If I put my hand on the front and the back of someone's heart, I can tell whether they're living in the back of their heart, because the back of the heart feels vacant. It just feels kind of empty compared to the felt sense that I notice in the front of the heart. Am I making sense there?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and if the person has any inner awareness at all, they can feel it too. If I just say, if I'm doing that with you in any given moment, and I just say, Stephen, how's it feel? What's the sensation in the front of your chest right now under my hand? And so you drop in, your eyes are closed. And then I say, tell me how it feels back in your spine where I'm holding the back of your heart. Oh, I don't have as much sensation there at all. And that's when the whole conversation begins. And then we begin the dialogue, we get to play with it, and they get to, for themselves, I mean, they're empowered to begin to drop in and drop back so that they have more of a sense of their deep, deep heart.
Fascinating. Let's go to the gut and talk a little bit more about how to access the gut wisdom in a consistent way, and what are its gifts in the wisdom council within us.
So the gut, remember, is the part that says, gee, this circumstance I'm standing in right now, or remember, in my circumstance, something that's just about to happen. This is a really good thing for you to do. Stick around. This feels great. Or you just may get a really nice, quiet message saying, get out. This is not a good circumstance. This is not good. And and by the way, this is different than the sense you get. All of us have our inner worry wart, right? The little gerbil in the cage in our head. And all of our own inner limiting beliefs, and all of us are working to clear those all the time, right? And that kind of worry has a very different feeling to it. Worry, like old worries, are not in the present moment. They're actually things that have gone on in the past. And they have a charge to them. And you're familiar with that charge when something shows up. A gut sense that something isn't right is just a real clear, quiet, get out of Dodge. This is not okay. And so if it's really important, oftentimes it'll up the ante until you're listening. Because I've been working with this and writing about this for a while, one of my fellow instructors at the Esalen Institute, who's an author, she and I were talking one evening, and I was talking about the gut and danger, and she goes, oh man, I have a most fascinating story for you. I was visiting a friend of mine in Manhattan, sitting in a little bay window overlooking, I don't know, the park that's there, Central Park. And I'm sitting across from her. She's seated back in the room a little bit. And I sat down and we started to drink our tea and talk. And suddenly I started to feel really uneasy. And I thought to myself, what's wrong with this? And the more I sat, the longer I sat, the more uneasy I felt, until I couldn't stand it any longer. I thought I was going to throw up. So I excused myself. I told her I just had to go home, got up and bolted out. Well, she called me about 15 minutes later. She said, and she was shaken. She was literally shaken. She says, I cannot believe it. Minutes after you left my apartment, someone trying to lower a piano down from several floors above crashed through the window and completely pulverized the chair you were sitting in.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So here, I mean, you can't make things like that up, right? And it was just stunning to her. And she knew exactly what I meant by the fact that the gut tells you about what's going on in this present moment, or perhaps what's coming just moments ahead, like in my original story and particularly in her story. But there's a very clear sense of it. It's not the feeling of an old worry at all. It's just get going. And if you listen to it, the gut speaks more and more coherently to you on a regular basis. If you don't listen to it, let's say you second guess it. Let's say you're a very intelligent person. In fact, a lot of your personality is based on how you think about things. You think of yourself as an incredible thinker. And so anytime you get a gut hit or a heartfelt warm sensation, your first thing is to go to your head and figure out whether it's valid. Is it reasonable? Is it logical? And if it's not, I don't know. Do we have any data on this? Well, okay, in that case, we can't trust it. If you have that kind of thing going on, which the more intelligent you are, sometimes the more liable you are to do this, it can actually undercut your gut's willingness to speak with you on a regular basis. Yeah. And the voice of the body, all the different wisdom areas, gets muted when you don't listen to it over time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Got to keep the channels open. Well,
Right.
Let's go. We had this intriguing thing we were talking about today about the black sheep of the wisdom centers. I'd love to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So you have to realize that most of us were not encouraged to be in our pelvises growing up, particularly if you're a woman. It's really a highly suspect part of your body. And, you know, it houses deep emotion, sensuality, sexuality, but it also houses power. And most of us were not encouraged. So I call it the black sheep of the wisdom areas, because this is the area that, of all the different wisdom areas of the body, people have the most number of limiting beliefs and strong opinions about actually being in that part of their body, embodying in that part of their body. Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to be aware that as you start to inhabit it, then probably there's going to be some programming that comes up as well.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it, Stephen. Programming, limiting belief, expectations, all those kinds of things just come crowding into the room with you when you first start to embody more deeply in a wisdom area that you've never been in before. Yeah.
Yeah. So how a little less clear exactly, how would you tune in with and get more access to the pelvic wisdom then?
Well, I do a whole series of things with people. One of the things you want to make sure of is that you don't have a physical block keeping you from feeling your pelvis. And because so many people fall and injure their coccyx or their sacrum across the course of their lifetime, and this is, I mean, as a craniosacral therapist, I see this all the time. I've had an injury myself to my sacrum, a serious injury. So I know that when that injury is there and the body with that physical trauma locks it down again, closes it off, you've lost access to the power that lives in your pelvis. So if you don't have access to the engine of the body, to the pelvis, what do you run on? Willpower. Willpower. Now, there's no clearer way to head towards burnout than running on willpower. Willpower is, by the way, when it's backed up by the power of the pelvis, is great, but not when you're trying to run on only your willpower. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, I used to study Aikido for a while, and you know, if you're trying to move somebody with like an arm, like force them, it doesn't happen. But if you drop into your hara or kind of lower centers, and then just you can have a relaxed arm, and then you can actually send people flying with that because it's sourced from a deeper place.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, you know, that's a really key piece here. The other thing, I actually learned about being grounded, like really being solidly grounded in my pelvis when I was in college. It was a very small college. And so there were not a lot of people to choose from. And so I humbly will tell you that I was in one of my friend's final dance performance for her thesis. And I got to be a tree because I wasn't really a dancer. So, you know, she wanted me to be able to be in the dance performance, but of course she didn't really want me to move a whole lot. And so there I was a tree in the middle of the stage. And part of what I had to do was I had to stand there, and somebody had to climb up one side of me and down the other side of me in the course of this performance. And so I had been taking Tai Chi and Qigong at the time. And so I knew about like putting down roots, and I got myself really firmly steady in the earth. And then I dropped into my pelvis, and the guy that had to go up one side and down the other had me outweighed by about 20 pounds. I mean,
Jeez.
I was solid. I was just like a rock. That was such a learning experience for me that I could do that. And that by my awareness, by my grounded awareness, that I could actually gain that kind of strength. That was truly astounding to me. And one of the first times, it was really fun to recognize that your conscious awareness and your ability to embody could change everything in your physiology. Yeah.
So connecting that to a life challenge. So if we're going into a particularly challenging circumstance, you're going to do something that brings your breath and awareness down into your pelvis, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And your feet and legs.
And your feet and legs. Okay.
Absolutely. Grounding is huge for strength and for activation of whatever it is. Let's say you're taking an action. You want to be in your feet and legs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, let's keep going, touring through these different body centers. Each one is fascinating. So you mentioned before about bones, and so let's talk about the bones. That's an area I've never heard anybody talk about bone wisdom. So this is new to me.
Well, the bones actually are one of my favorite places, and I have a really lovely meditation that I do with the bones. If you think about our bones, they are the densest, sturdiest form of connective tissue in the body. Remember, I'm a body worker. So when I began to work, and I'm also a craniosacral therapist, so I work with cranial bones, the spinal bones, the sacrum, and I'm taught how to listen to movement in bones. But the thing that I began to notice when I learned how to drop into my own bones, into my own spine, into my own sacrum, into my own pelvic bones that form the pelvic bowl, when I was able to drop into the bones of my legs and my arms, there's a sense of solidness and stability that came into my awareness. And I'm thinking to myself, isn't that interesting? And then I thought, well, sure, that's a no-brainer. Here I am in the sturdiest part of my own body. Of course that would be true, right? And then it became very clear that as I sat there in my bones, it was almost as though all the emotional mud of the circumstances around me swirling began to just clear and clear and clear, as though the water was just getting very, very clear. So in the stillness of sitting in your bones, you get a really beautiful sense of clarity that is very difficult to get from any other wisdom area. So steadiness and clarity come with our bones. I have a fun story about this. It's interesting because everything that I'm sharing with you are things that I have gotten bits and pieces of in different places. And then it's almost as though Spirit has brought me examples so I could see exactly what I was supposed to learn about this area. So one day, a couple came into my office. This story is actually in my first book, Full Body Presence. And they would come in and they would work with each other. We'd have a 2-hour session. One of them would get on the table. The other would hold their feet, and then they'd reverse it. So this is great. So they lay down on the table. She lays down on the table. Her husband says, "Where would you like my feet, honey?" And she says, "Oh, it doesn't matter, anywhere." And he said, "No, where do you want my hands on your feet? Do you want them on top? Do you want them on your ankles? Do you want them on your heels?" And she says, "Oh, no, it doesn't matter. I don't care." And I thought to myself, he looked at me, I looked at him, and thought, okay, that's very interesting. And I realized, because I was just beginning to write the whole piece about the bones 15 years ago. And I put my hand under one part of her spine, and then I put it under another part of her spine. And I had her begin to just breathe and drop her awareness into the sensation of her spine on my hands, resting on my hands. What's the sensation of your backbone starting to drop and just easily relax onto the table? And we were there probably 10 minutes. We're having a discussion about certain things. And all of a sudden, out of her mouth pops, "Oh, you know what? I don't like my hands on the top of my feet like that, like you're doing it. Could you hold my heels? No, a little more gently than, yeah, there you've got it." So suddenly, she went from not knowing at all what she needed or wanted to knowing exactly what she needed and wanted. And that's what happens when you drop into your bones. Yeah?
Yeah, there's a clarity and specificity. That's wonderful.
Absolutely. And it's a very interesting piece. Who'da thunk, right? That's the way it works. But I have seen this over and over and over again. And this is particularly true when people are accommodators in their lives. They are oriented to the outside. They're always paying attention to what's going on outside themselves. This, if you think about it, this frequently happens to people who have had trauma happen in their lives, particularly as children. They have to orient outside themselves to make sure they're safe. There's a level of hypervigilance that comes with that kind of circumstance. And people like that rarely actually orient deep inside themselves. So if you say, "What do you want?" they can't tell you. They don't know. They'll often say, "Oh, it doesn't matter, I'm fine." Or they'll give you an answer that you can clearly feel isn't right, but they're guessing. So this piece of being able to really feel deep inside is a very key piece of being self-responsible, it's also a very key piece of being able to hold a meditative focus. It is very important to know how to clearly step into your soul's path as a human being. And I know that many of your listeners are deeply committed to that process in their lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's, you touched on one other center, but let's just make sure we take the full tour here of all the wisdom centers. So we've got two more that you were going to cover a little bit on.
We have the feet and legs. Yes.
Great. Yes.
Okay. So the feet and legs are, I call them the activation wisdom center. And they, as I said, they are, if the pelvis is the black sheep, the feet and legs are the stealth part of, as a wisdom area, because most people don't think of their feet and legs as having any wisdom at all. And yet, if you were asked anytime, I've asked thousands of groups now, how many of you have ever taken a walk? The piece I gave you earlier, taken a walk and had a problem solved by the time you came home without even thinking about it? And hands go up. Multiple hands. Usually most of the room raises their hand. So they know that they solve problems when they take a nice long walk. They don't understand how it works. So then they can't replicate it when they actually need to get a good decision, a nice, clear, integrated decision. They're not aware of how they did it. Well, they did it by activating their feet and legs and doing some kind of cross-body movement. Yeah? Yeah. Now, the last wisdom area, which is fascinating to me, because most people say, oh, well, you're a body person. You don't believe in the brain. I say, oh, yeah. The brain is absolutely, particularly the prefrontal cortex, is absolutely one of the most fantastic strategizers and map makers that we've got. And so there's a lot of information that we know physiologically comes into the brain all the time. I'm not talking about that. I'm actually talking about the information from these wisdom centers of the body that's constantly being signaled to the brain. The heart math people have done tremendous work on the ways in which the heart and the heart brain signal up into our brain that's in our heads. All of the information now that's going on about the gut, the enteric brain, if you will, and how much information gets relayed to the immune system, to the brain itself, to many, many other parts of the body, and creates either an optimal or a suboptimal circumstance in our lives. So the brain is meant to receive information, and it does. In an ideal, in an optimal circumstance, the brain is constantly receiving this wisdom from these different wisdom areas of our body. If things are compartmentalized or locked away, you can have a problem. If the brain thinks it's the king and it knows everything, that will handicap you as well. So, because it's not, it's just a committee member, just like all the rest of the body. It is an incredible strategizer and map maker. So it takes all the information it gets from all these other wisdom areas and then creates a plan that makes sense. And it's a really good plan, a good integrated plan, because it's receiving the information from all the rest of you. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Yeah, I like the way you're looking at it. It feels very much like when you have a CEO and you have a management team, and you're sort of seeing all these parts of your being as parts of your management team of yourself, really.
Yes. Now, let's take this one step farther. One of my soapboxes is intuition. It's like when people say to me, well, my intuition told me this. And I always say, tell me about your intuition. When you're listening to your intuition, is it whole body intuition, integrated intuition? Or is it something you thought and maybe you felt a little bit in your heart, but you're not really, you're not really connected to your gut, much less your pelvis or your feet and legs, or definitely not your bones, because it's based on a belief you have, and then kind of a hunch you got, and then maybe a little bit from the ethers comes in, but it's not really as deep an intuition as it can be when it's coming from all of the wisdom areas of who you are and the connection. When all those wisdom areas are activated, Stephen, it's almost as though you have radio transmitters from the universe. And so we not only are fully embodied here, but this incredible, incredible navigational system that makes up our whole body, that system is connected out into the universe. And all of the transmitters, all the receiving buttons are open. when you're home. So what you get in terms of information and its capacity to be integrated and wise and really bring in new creative ideas, that's where our intuitions and our creativity are at their best.
Well, let's bring this down to, I love the synthesis you're offering. So let's bring it down to, how do we ask ourselves a question? So let's say that we're trying to get, we've got a really big question in our life. How do we take a more integrated and whole being approach to getting an answer to that question?
Okay, so I'll take you on a little walkthrough, if you will. And we're going to be going into this in a lot more depth in that 7 modules where I'll get to unpack it a lot more. But I can give you a really nice picture of it right now. And that picture is like, let's say you have a question, you have an idea, and you're perhaps an inspiration. Let's say you really are inspired to do a particular task, and it feels like it's just yours to do. And you drop inside with it. Yes, your heart lights up. Take a moment, drop into your gut, drop down a little deeper. And when you drop into your gut, does your gut say to you, yeah, this is right for you, go for it? Or does your gut say to you, it's a really wonderful idea, not yours? Okay. But let's say, for instance, that it does say that it's yours to do. So you're going to drop a level deeper, and that would be to the pelvis. And in the pelvis, you're going to ask, do I have the power and the energy to follow through on this inspiration? If I do, the pelvis is going to say, go for it. Or the pelvis might signal back up to you, you know, we are really tapped out right now. Let's think about doing this in a month or 2, but not now. We don't have the energy for it. The engine of the body is really overtaxed at the moment. So let's not take on anything more. Okay, so that might be a signal that says, slow it down. But let's say that it says, yes, you got it. Then, if you have any additional questions about it, well, what about, and what if, and this kind of scares me a little bit, that would be where you would drop deep into your bones, deep back into your bones, and sit with the idea, with the inspiration, till all the mud settles. And you can see the circumstance clearly, cleanly, deep inside of you. And you get exactly what it looks like, what you need to do, how it needs to happen. Okay? At that point, I'd get up and take a walk if I were you. Mm-hmm. I would go and take a walk and get it started, get it activated, and let your brain start to strategize and make it into a reality so that you create what it is that you wanted to create.
So the brain plus the feet and legs is a good final combo to kind of get the whole thing inked in. That's great. And so that sequence itself it's good to do that sequence and unfolding, you think?
Yes. Yes. Now, having said that, that's like in an optimal circumstance. Sometimes something will happen, so it'll come in another doorway first. So let's say, for instance, let's say you walk into a room, the situation isn't quite comfortable for you, and you're not really sure why. You sit there for a minute, listen to your gut. Listen to your gut. And if the gut says danger, you turn around and walk out. Okay? But let's say that it's somewhere you're walking into that's a business meeting, and it's something you have to stay at because you work there. Then you need to drop into your bones, and you would check with your bones. You get really nice and clear and get very grounded right on down into your feet and legs through your pelvis. And you're going to want to get as many of these wisdom areas on board and listen to the powwow. What are they telling you about why your gut is uneasy? And you might even then begin to include the brain, because we would call it an educated gut. Your brain can actually start to rerun circumstances like this that you might have seen before, so that you can make a decision about whether or not it's working for you. And you can also make a decision about what is it that's off in this circumstance, and what is it about it, if there's anything, that is okay. Okay? So you see how you can come in different doors depending on what's going on. I've gotten some of my biggest ahas and inspirations while I'm out taking a walk. Just came up. Once I got my feet and legs moving, all of a sudden my creativity started to run. So there you start with the feet and legs, and yeah. Like,
oh, well, I love the integrated approach. And so there's one other thing that we mentioned on this page just around that I want to make sure we cover is this, one of the top myths that's blocking you from accessing your body wisdom in any single moment. So any myths that we need to dissolve so that we can do this as a daily practice?
well, I actually wrote a whole chapter in Reclaiming Your Body about the 5 main body myths. They're just 5 categories that I constantly see. I've already talked about one of them when I talked about second guessing your gut. That myth says my brain is far more intelligent than my gut. Why would I want to listen to my gut? Now that's just false. So, but people, because of our culture and our education system and all of that, people believe that the most intelligent part of who we are is what's between our ears. It's just not real. That's not true. This is a great part of us, but only in concert with everything else. So that's one of the main myths that anybody of any intelligence at all can probably, I mean, I know in that trauma at the age of 17, I succumbed to that myth. I second guessed. My God, I kept saying, oh, I got to be nice. I got to be polite. He's my friend, all of that. Another myth is that if I drop into my body, it's going to be way too painful. This tends to happen when someone has had a lot of trauma in their lives. And indeed, when they first drop inside, what they feel is the pain of some kind of encapsulated traumatic memory. Now, the myth is that that's all there is. I mean, if I'm in my body, it's just going to be pain, 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 and nothing else. And this pain is way, way, way overwhelming, way too much for me to be able to handle. The myth of it is that it's all that there is. Yes, the pain's real, but the myth is that you don't have anything else in your body but pain. And part of what embodying in all these different wisdom areas brings us is connection to our own deeper energy reservoir, which can hold and love and transform those painful places. And I talk about that at length in many of my trainings, because this is a core piece for us as human beings. We are fundamentally, right now on the planet, there is so much trauma and upheaval and everything else that the average person is living with such a high level of anxiety unconsciously that it's very uncomfortable to be in your body most of the time. So people over-medicate, they over-drink, they overeat. They're not eating foods that are actually decent for them. So they're messing with their blood sugar, and then their brain doesn't operate as well, and they're foggy-headed. And there's so many things that go on when that level of anxiety is going on the planet. So that body myth is a biggie. The third body myth is that the body is going to seduce you. I talked about that with growing up on that front pew of the Southern Baptist Church. Particularly the pelvis and the gut are going to seduce you. Something bad's going to happen. You drop in there, it's not a good idea. And then, another one is that our bodies hold emotion that's dangerous. Like if I drop into my body, I'm going to get in touch with rage and I'm going to kill somebody and I'll be out of control, and I don't want to do that. So that's a myth. That's a biggie for many people. The final myth is that the body is something you have to control. You have to ride it, whip it into shape, just keep on going. No matter what the body's telling you, just got to keep going. It's like riding a horse right into the ground, if you will, because that's what we do. The output, the goal is much more important than how I'm feeling inside.
What's a great, you've covered a lot of ground already here today. So, but I also want to make sure we have a chance to talk about your upcoming program. So this is a good opportunity to do that right now. So first of all, I want to say, Suzanne, how delighted we are to be working with you. I feel like you're opening up a whole new terrain for us, and it's building on several important lineages of deep transformation. And I feel like ultimately we're here to incarnate a higher way of being, and that means that we have to do that with an embodied approach. And so it's not an up and out game that we're playing where it's like we're bringing it all down and in. And so I feel like you're helping us land in a deeper way in our bodies and access a deeper intelligence and move more freely and release traumas. So there's applications for anybody who's working as a healer or you know, as you were saying about the back of the side of the heart, you know, that practice alone can transform how we're actually being of healing and helpful influence to others. So we're very excited for your upcoming program. It's a 7-week program. It's called Reclaiming Your 6 Body Wisdom Areas. So it's going to go into much more depth into each of the 6 areas we touched upon today, and it's focused on healing from trauma, releasing blocks, and liberating your full spectrum intuition. So each of those aspects, the releasing of trauma, the releasing blocks, and then accessing intuition, is part of this unveiling of a new relationship with our bodies and with our whole beings. So you can find this program at reclaimingbodywisdom.com. Again, that's reclaimingbodywisdom.com. And Suzanne, I'd love for you to share in your own words what it is that you're most excited to offer to people who are coming into this program.
Well, I think that one of the key pieces that for me is most important is that our body is the one thing that's constant across our whole lives, Stephen. This is it. I spent many, many years meditating, many, many, many years. I still meditate, but I do meditations that take me deeper into the body. So I become a friend to my body. So as it changes, as I age, as I come more deeply into my own soul's journey, it's here, available as my partner to help me do that. And I think that, you know, we often place our emphasis on the outer relationships, our partners, our children, our teachers, our parents, you know, whatever it is. But in fact, all of those relationships change and fall away as we go through our lives. The relationship we have with our body is ours, our whole lives until we leave the planet. So having a really good, excellent, intimate knowing about your own unique physical body and how to be there with it in a way that is a partner and a friend. This is my platform. This is what feels most important to me as a human being. And there are 2 different reasons for that. Number 1 is because we have incredible vitality and joy that's there waiting for us to access it. But number 2, we are alive on the planet today at a time when the capacity for critical thinking, the capacity for being very clear about what's going on, what has integrity and what doesn't, what's fake and what's real, all of these things are vitally important. And the only way to really know this is if we're deeply embodied and very present in each moment of our lives. If we're living accommodating it to everybody else, if we're living in our heads, it's very difficult to ascertain these things. So I feel as though our, whether we as human beings make it or not, is going to depend on us finding our way home again to the wisdom of who we are.
Beautiful. Well, we're super excited about this. Love for you to share a little bit about the 7 modules themselves, just to highlight the journey and what people are going to be gaining. Again, this is a journey that's appropriate for people who are professionals of any kind, but also people who are really on just a path of exploration and self-growth and healing themselves. So it's not strictly tailored to professionals, although there's a lot of great professional applications.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would say that's absolutely true. And, you know, also, I think anyone who's been on a consciousness journey, particularly like I have for 3.5, 4 decades, that it is vital that you get this piece. Otherwise, there's a disconnect that happens at some point that, as you said earlier, kind of makes it more ethereal, but there's no juice to it. And I think so coming to this place is very, very important. What we're going to uncover in these 7 modules is amazing. The first module we're going to talk about is, I believe we're going to talk about the 5 body myths. We're going to go into them, unpack them in a lot more detail, talk about them so people can start to recognize, oh, right, oh, that's mine. Oh, wait a minute, that's mine. Oh, that's mine. I'll forewarn you that most medical students, when they read their textbooks in the beginning, diagnose themselves with everything they're reading about. Most of you are also going to say, oh my God, that's mine. Oh, that one's mine. Oh, I'm never going to make it, right? But I'll be, I'm very kind about this. We're just going to look at them. And what I'm going to talk about is also the antidote to it, to each one of those. What's the way out? So we're going to talk about that in more depth. The second module, we're going to go into the heart, the front and the back of the heart. We're going to be speaking about the wisdom of the heart, what it gives you. What are the traps that can happen with the heart if you are only partially embodied in it? We'll talk about that. The third will be the gut. We'll go into gut wisdom, what it means, how to use it, how to abuse it, how to do it in a half-baked way that can be problematic. And next we'll go into the pelvis, and we'll go into that black sheep of the wisdom areas, and we'll be talking about all the power of it, all the vitality of it, all the sensuality and juiciness of it, and how to have it in a way that has integrity so that it's not a trap. We'll be going into the bones, deep into the bones. It's been very, very exciting for me. I was able to teach 2 classes to entry-level students in the last 2 weeks. And I was able to do some very wonderful bone meditations with them. They were entry-level people. These are things I was thinking, oh, only my advanced students. No, they got it. And we were all in such an expanded, deep place from going into our bones. So we'll be working with that in the module on the bones. And then we'll do a module on the feet and legs. We'll talk about that. I'll tell you how to activate it and how that activation begins to activate your dreams. And then our final piece will be about putting it all together and with the brain and that great strategizer, map maker, and how to work with your whole system so it all comes together.
Fantastic. Well, it's clearly a very well thought out program and a very integrated approach to body wisdom. So I think this is something clearly people can't get anywhere else. You have a very unique set of influences that you've synthesized into this very practical roadmap of a journey into our bodies and healing and awakening our deeper wisdom. So I'll share a little bit more about it. First of all, as we said, it's a 7-week journey. It's a video-based course. We wanted to do this so that you could really see Suzanne in action. Sometimes she's demonstrating things. Because it's about embodiment, it helps to have more of the body visible too. So that will be a special feature of this program. You get not only the time in class with Suzanne, but there's also going to be exercises you can do at home. We want this to make this very transformational for you. We have an online Facebook community. You have videos that you can catch up with. You also get transcripts, word for word, of every session, which we find is a really great way to reinforce the learning, be able to quickly scan back and get some of the points you missed and apply it in the future. So it really enhances the value for your transformational library for years to come. We also have added some great bonuses from Suzanne. There's one is called Reclaiming Your Body, Healing from Trauma and Awakening to Your Body's Wisdom. That's the first chapter of her ebook. Another interview with Suzanne and Paul Samuel Dolman. It's called What Matters Most. You want to say anything about that interview?
Oh my God, that was one of the funnest interviews I have ever done. And I've done like hundreds of interviews at this point. There was something about his knowledge and where I was that day. And he's very much a meditator. He's very much about expanded consciousness. It was fun. That was a really, really powerful interview. Yeah.
Well, that'll be a treat for people. We also have another whole audio package from Suzanne called Basic Relaxation and Energizing Exercises. So again, our intention with this program is very experiential, it's very embodied, and so these are helping you to relax more deeply and energize in a specific body wisdom way. We also have one other bonus is available just for today only. We like to do this as our kind of special extra cherry on top of the sundae for you, to encourage you to go over to the page at reclaimingbodywisdom.com and give it a read through today. And so this is actually a huge bonus. It's a 7-hour audio series called The Journey Home to Ourselves. This is 10 sessions, more than 7 hours of audio. It's valued at $70 independently of this whole program, and so it's a great extra value when you sign up by midnight today. Again, you can find that at reclaimingbodywisdom.com. and you can give that a read through. It's actually quite a lot of detail with 10 different sessions. Suzanne, you want to share a little bit more about A Journey Home to Ourselves?
You know, it's interesting because I have updated and redone some of those audios across the years. I first did it in 1996. And every now and again, I go back and I listen to it and I say, gosh, has it gotten outdated? And no, it's really a classic. In that 10 session series, I go into the how-to of being grounded, how to hold spaces that are in pain inside of you that you are feeling locked out of, how to be grounded in movement, how to be grounded with breath, how to be grounded when you're eating, like how to eat in a way that's nourishing and nurturing, how to be grounded and present when you're interacting with someone else so you gain energy rather than lose energy. And each one of these has a different focus. So it is my classic cornerstone series. And I'm delighted that you're offering it as a download for people.
It's fantastic. Well, the program is going to begin on October 10th, and it's going to be on Tuesdays at noon Pacific time. That's 3 Eastern. So even if you can't make the live time, we encourage you to go for it, and you can get the full value because you get the videos, you get the audios, you get the transcripts, and you can participate in the community and ask questions virtually in the Facebook group. So really, whatever time you have available, you can always get the value from this. So we've kept it very accessible. There's a lot of value, including this very robust extra bonus for today. So it's only 3 payments of $109, or you can save about 10% when you pay in full with $297. So you get all the details at reclaimingbodywisdom.com, reclaimingbodywisdom.com, and also read through the testimonials. I always find that that's, for me, one of the most important things. Really read the benefits that people have gotten from doing a particular body of work. So it's not just about some inspiration, it's about lasting change in your life to heal traumas, release blocks, open to more vitality, open to a sense of just like really loving being in your body and loving being in this life. So Suzanne, it's been a great time with you. I feel like you're a tremendous teacher and got a lot of great insights today. Just in this last minute or two, just anything that's still on your heart you want to speak directly to the folks who are considering taking the 7-week journey with you into reclaiming body wisdom.
Wow. I am just very excited to be sharing this. I know that for us as human beings, as I said earlier, this is it. This is where the journey is. And I've studied many, many, many things philosophically. And the journey now is about doing it, about how do we embody more deeply? How do we make contact? And so I look forward to giving you the how-tos of this in these 7 modules.
Beautiful. Well, you're quite a bright light and a lot of deep wisdom. Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you all for joining us. May this time help to illuminate a whole different relationship with your body. I feel like it opened my eyes to the wisdom in my bones and pelvis and feet and things that I hadn't really thought about before. So I really feel like this has been a great gift and a great blessing, and if you sign up for the program at Reclaiming Your 6 Body Wisdom Areas, you will get far, far more. So that's again at reclaimingbodywisdom.com, and you're warmly welcome to join. There's a money-back guarantee of your satisfaction, and you get the extra special bonus of the full 7 hours of 10 sessions when you sign up by midnight tonight Pacific time. So again, that's reclaimingbodywisdom.com. See you there, and thanks, Suzanne. Bye.
Thank you, Stephen.